talk to President Putin about the specific things that the Russians will do to help in this situation, but I don't think you should be in any doubt that President Putin and the Russian people were utterly horrified by this. And of course, they themselves have suffered terrorist outrages in Russia too.
When we talk about the military component of any response, do you think NATO has obviously unprecedentedly given its full support to come to mutual defense of one of its members? Do you envision a classic NATO-style response, or how would you envision a military response?
I think there's a process that we need to get clear here. First of all, we identify those responsible. Then we work out the correct military response, and then we see the right way of putting that together. Now, I think we're too premature at this stage to start speculating on the exact nature of either the response or the way that we will pursue it. But obviously, as I say, there will be these two components to the action that we take. The more immediate action, if you like, to bring to account those responsible, and then over time, the systematic war upon the whole machinery of terrorism.
Do you think that the United States would take unilateral action, or do you expect that there will be, you know, further consultations and sort of gathering of the coalition?
I think that the way that President Bush has handled this is absolutely right. I mean, he has been very calm and measured in the way that he has approached it. He has been in close consultation with allies. Obviously, America has got to defend itself against such an attack. And, you know, we will be there in support of America in doing that, and that is important. But it has been done in a way that I think reflects very great credit in the administration, because their determination is absolute, but their way of doing it, quite rightly, is to say, look, this is where we stand, this is why we stand in this position, and join us in it. And I think that that will, of itself, win a great deal of support. And as I say, not just amongst Western countries or countries that are traditional allies of the United States. I think they will get support for that position right across the world.
The President of the United States has talked about a fight between good and evil, and a lot has been made of a sort of a clash of civilizations, or a clash of fanatics against the civilized world. How do you see this clash, if there is one?
Well, I think those are two very separate things. The vast majority of Muslims are decent, law-abiding people, were absolutely appalled by this outrage, and will be fully supportive of us taking action against international terrorism. Indeed, many Muslims are victims of international terrorism. So no sense should this be seen as, if you like, one part of the world against the Islamic world. It's not like that at all, and I think people understand that very, very clearly. But it is a war, if you like, between the civilized world and fanaticism. And whatever banner that fanaticism marches under, it is important that we recognize these are people who will stop at nothing. And therefore, however difficult it is for us, and however much we will regret the fact that we have to take this action because of the terrible thing that has happened, nonetheless we have to do so. And this is a time for, you know, for cool head, for calm nerves, and for an absolute and fixed determination to see this thing through. And we will see it through. It will be done.
On that note, thank you very much for joining us, Mr. Prime Minister.
All right, that was Christiane Amanpour talking with Prime Minister Tony Blair in London there. Now, a new poll is indicating that 3 out of 4 Britons support military action against those responsible for the terror attacks in the United States. For some perspective now on how the attacks are shaping British political sentiment, I'm joined by our European political editor, Robin Oakley, once again. Robin?
Jim, what was interesting, I think, there about Christiane's interview with Tony Blair was that he was perfectly willing to use this language of an act of war. He qualified it slightly by saying it is a war against terrorism. But clearly, Britain is willing to stand militarily with the United States, while we're seeing some slight possible cracks in the alliance otherwise, with other European leaders saying that this is not a war. We have had Louis Michel, the foreign minister of Belgium, currently holding the EU presidency, saying this is not a war. And people were worried too when Lionel Jospin, the French prime minister, said this is not a war. But he, of course, was careful to say this is not a war against Islam. And I think we have to be very careful in assessing the reactions across Europe now. Different people are using different language. in a very careful way, because I think many European leaders don't want a war against other states, and they don't want a backlash against Muslims worldwide, but they are prepared to provide considerable backing for the United States in building this coalition against terrorism. And I think what we've seen from Tony Blair there in the interview is they are all looking to a two-stage operation. First of all, to bring the terrorists to justice. Secondly, to start dismantling the apparatus of terrorism worldwide. And at that stage, clearly, European leaders, and certainly very strong sentiment in British public opinion, for at that stage, penalising countries, punishing countries which harbour terrorists, as well as punishing the terrorists themselves. Jim.
Robin, as we look at it, and you point this out, I mean, war may be just a word, but it means many things to different people. That's one thing on the rhetorical end of it. But the Bush administration has isolated itself somewhat on a number of issues there in Europe. Is that coming home to hurt this administration? The sense there that the U.S. may ask you into a coalition, but won't listen to your advice?
I think, Jim, normal politics has been suspended in Europe and worldwide. This act of terrorism is an act that has changed the world. It is perfectly true that when President Bush came to Europe for the G8 summit, came earlier for a European Union summit, there was a feeling that his approach was somewhat isolationist, typified by action on the Kyoto Protocol, on the environment, not joining the others in taking the action they wanted to take against global warming. But I think that is on an entirely different scale. And I think, again, as we heard from Tony Blair this morning, people now across Europe, governments, leaders across Europe, perceive this attack as an attack not just on the United States. It is a kind of attack that could happen anywhere in the civilized world, they feel now, and that if the terrorists are not, if there is not punishment for terrorists who have ratcheted up the scale of terrorism to this level, then the whole of the civilized world is at risk. And when Tony Blair was addressing the British Parliament, the emergency session they had, he warned that the terrorists will not stop at driving planes into buildings, but that there is a real fear, should they get their hands on weapons of chemical and biological warfare, then they would be prepared to use those. So I think smaller scale differences with the United States about specific items of policy that we've seen in recent months are forgotten against the background of this, the enormity of this terrorist attack.
All right.
Jim.
Some good perspective there. Robin Oakley, our thanks to you for that. Relitza.
Jim, some stark statements from President Bush to the American people this weekend. Mr. Bush spent much of the day with his national security team at Camp David, the presidential retreat. CNN's White House correspondent Major Garrett joins us now from Washington. Major.
Good morning, Relitza. Very stern rhetoric from the U.S. president on Saturday, saying, among other things, in a message to all U.S. service personnel, get ready. He identified Osama bin Laden as the prime suspect, though also he said there are other suspects the United States is looking at. And the White House later in the day made it clear that it was not ruling out ground troops in any military assault against those who perpetrated the terrorist acts Tuesday in New York and Virginia and Pennsylvania. And in his weekly radio address, the president made it clear to the United States that this is a war, a different kind of war, but nevertheless a war that he is confident the country can win.
This weekend, I am engaged in extensive sessions with members of my National Security Council as we plan a comprehensive assault on terrorism. This will be a different kind of conflict against a different kind of enemy. This is a conflict without battlefields or beachheads, a conflict with opponents who believe they are invisible, yet they are mistaken. They will be exposed, and they will discover what others in the past have learned. Those who make war against the United States have chosen their own destruction.
Relitza, another significant passage from the president's radio address, and I quote the president here: "I will not settle for a token act. Our response must be sweeping, sustained, and effective. We have much to do and much to ask of the American people." President spending a good deal of his day on Saturday doing exactly that, only hours removed from the different obligations of a commander-in-chief, that is, to console the nation. President spent much of the day on Friday doing just that, leading the nation in a prayer service service of remembrance in the National Cathedral, and then traveling to New York City to see the devastation there firsthand, and spending more than 3 hours with families of police officers and firefighters killed trying to respond to the catastrophe at Manhattan, Lower Manhattan. White House aides say the president was absolutely overcome with the emotion expressed by those family members, and through it all, spending nearly 3 hours with them. At first very emotional, but at the end steeled with a sense that he as commander-in-chief must do something to prove to them and others that those civilian victims have not died in vain. Relitza.
Major, thank you. Jim.
Well, for the latest now from the scene of the World Trade Center attacks, where the cleanup, the rescue and recovery efforts continue, let's go to Gary Tuchman. He's there. Gary.
Jim, there's no quieter time of the week in New York City than a Sunday just before dawn. But here in Lower Manhattan, it's anything but quiet. There is lots of traffic, lots of police activity, and lots of noise because the World Trade Center rescue is still in full gear. As we speak, hundreds of emergency workers are still on the scene just behind me, about 5 blocks behind me, trying to find survivors. The news has not been good over the last 3 days. No survivors have been found. 5 survivors were found the day of this disaster and the day after, but they are still looking for the possibility of survivors. 4,972 people are missing. They are also clearing wreckage. So far, 22,000 tons of rubble have been cleared, but that's only a minute percentage of the total rubble that's there, about 4%. There is still a lot of work to be done here. With us right now are 2 of the thousands of volunteers who have been out at the scene since the beginning. This is Julie Forsberg next to me. This is Stephen Michaels. Stephen is a volunteer emergency medical technician. You've been helping out also. Julie, tell me what you've been doing there.
Wednesday night, I sort of hopped around helping carry boxes of food and trying to give rescue workers clean socks and dried t-shirts and coffee, and digging a little bit and moving buckets of rubble a little bit, but mostly helping with food the first night. And the next couple nights just sort of coming down and pitching in with shoveling and moving buckets and like lines of people trying to help.
Okay, Stephen, you're a student here in New York City, but you have medical training back home in Michigan. Tell me what the scene is like there right now.
Right now, it's...
You're just finishing, by the way, for the day, right? How many hours have you been here?
I don't know.
You lost track.
Yeah, you kind of lose track when you're out there.
Okay, what's the scene like right now?
Right now, it's kind of changed since Tuesday. You know, Tuesday it was a lot scarier. Now it's, you know, more machinery, you know, picking off the layers to, you know, get at the people that are possibly, you know, up to, you know, 8 stories underground. You know, the rubble has really gone down deep.
You're helping out with the triage unit. On Tuesday it must have been very busy there, right?
On Tuesday it was very busy. Tuesday it was kind of mass chaos, you know, setting up the triage centers. You know, I was here, you know, immediately after the scene, and, you know, it was just a big cloud of smoke and trying to get the hundreds and thousands of people and, you know, from the nearby neighborhoods, not even getting to the main infrastructure yet. You know, it was more, you know, just immediate work on the people that, you know, nearby.
And how disappointing has it been that there's been no one to treat over the past couple of days?
It's been really scary, but we still haven't lost hope. You know, 2 nights ago when it was raining, you know, we still were in full hope that we were, you know, going to find somebody. And, you know, the dogs had a couple of hits throughout the night, and, you know, I mean, that keeps us going, you know, that keeps us hoping that there's somebody there. You know, it's very personal for each and every one of us out here, I'm sure. You know, it's we don't take it lightly, you know.
Stephen and Julie, thank you very much. Good luck to you in the future. It's great that you've been helping out so much. What's really scary about this is that when this is all over, this death toll could rise to a number as high as 5,100. Jim, back to you.
Gary Tuchman, thank you much for introducing us to a couple of the people that are doing the important work, perhaps on behalf of all of us. Well, New York firefighters are continuing their work at the rescue site. At the same time, they are mourning the loss of their own. More than 300 firefighters now dead or missing. Among those that were buried on Saturday, 3 top officials, including Fire Chief Peter Gansey.